The ambassador fell silent, his eyes wide as the human leaned back in his chair and grinned. "So, let me get this straight," the human said, his tone as casual as if discussing weather forecasts. "You're upset because we negotiated your entire war into a game of chess?" The council chamber buzzed with whispers as the assembled representatives of the Galactic Union, some with scales, others with feathers, and a few with features too alien to describe easily, exchanged uneasy glances. Chess was a game, a quaint and seemingly harmless pastime invented by humans. Yet here it was, a linchpin of galactic diplomacy that had somehow forced one of the most militarily advanced species, the Drexen Empire, to surrender without a shot being fired. Ambassador Reckon of the Drexens bared his sharp teeth in frustration. "You trivialized a conflict spanning 5 systems into a child's game. My people will never recover from the shame." Commander Hayden shrugged, his expression betraying no sympathy. "You could have said no, but you didn't. You thought it would be easy to beat us because we're unpredictable primates from a death world. How'd that work out?" The Drexen ambassador growled low in his throat, his clawed hands curling into fists. His species was built for war, 7-foot-tall bipeds armored with natural exoskeletons and reflexes honed to perfection by centuries of evolution. That strength, it seemed, meant little when faced with what humans called strategy. Representative Aldrich of the Relosians, a species of aquatic beings resembling a cross between jellyfish and cephalopods, floated in his water-filled mobility tank, chiming in with his usual soft, melodious voice. "If I may, Commander, how exactly did your kind achieve such a feat? No offense to humanity, but Drexens are not known for conceding easily." Hayden's grin widened. "That's the thing about humans. We don't fight fair. You folks have a habit of thinking strength alone wins battles. Us, we like to outthink the competition, and when we can't, well, we cheat." "Cheat?" Ambassador Reckon's voice rose in disbelief. "You admit it." "Oh, relax," Hayden waved dismissively. "Not in the way you're thinking. We just exploit every loophole, every assumption, and every bit of arrogance you throw at us." The room went silent. This wasn't new information. The Galactic Union had long debated humanity's strange habits, why they thrived in environments deemed inhospitable by nearly every standard, why they worked so well together despite constant disagreements, and why their technological progress didn't always follow a logical path. But none of those quirks explained how they turned a simple game into a tool for reshaping interstellar geopolitics. Hayden, aware of the room's tension, leaned forward. "You see, the most terrifying power we have isn't our strength, our technology, or even our adaptability. It's something no one really talks about because it sounds ridiculous." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "It's our imagination." Ambassador Reckon scoffed. "Imagination? You expect us to believe that your species' ability to fantasize about nonsensical scenarios is a strength? You don't get it." Hayden's voice turned serious, the grin fading. "Imagination isn't just about dreaming up scenarios. It's the ability to think beyond the immediate, to connect dots that don't seem connected, to see patterns and solutions no one else notices. That's how we took your unbeatable fleet and boxed it into a game. It wasn't about chess. It was about seeing a way to win before you even knew the game had begun." Representative Aldrich tilted his translucent head. "Is that why you call your tactics creative warfare?" "Exactly," Hayden said. "While you were planning your invasion routes and calculating firepower ratios, we were figuring out how to win without ever firing a shot. A few psychological plays, a handful of symbolic moves, and suddenly your generals were playing into our hands. Before they realized what was happening, they'd already lost." Ambassador Reckon stood, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the table. "This is no strength. It's cowardice, deceit, and manipulation." Hayden didn't flinch. "Call it what you want. At the end of the day, it works. And honestly, we'd rather win with words and ideas than turn another system into a graveyard." The Drexen ambassador glared at him, but said nothing. The room remained tense, the weight of the conversation settling over the representatives like a heavy cloud. Many of them had underestimated humans, dismissing their oddities as weaknesses. But this revelation, this quiet, unassuming weapon called imagination, was forcing them to reevaluate everything. Hayden broke the silence, his tone lighter now. Look, I get why this bothers you. It's not fun to lose, especially not like this. But if it's any consolation, we don't pick fights. We just make sure we end them on our terms. On your terms, Rakan repeated bitterly. And what happens when your kind decides our terms don't matter anymore? Hayden met the ambassador's gaze, his expression unreadable. That's the thing about humans. We only get dangerous when someone else makes the first move. The room buzzed again with uneasy murmurs. Even those who had never clashed with humanity were starting to understand why the rumors about them, half true, half ridiculous, carried a kernel of fear. They weren't just survivors or innovators. They were thinkers who saw a battlefield where others saw order. Representative Aldrich, ever the diplomat, raised a tentacle in a gesture of calm. Perhaps it is time we adjourn this meeting. There is much to reflect on. The council began to disperse, but as Hayden stood to leave, he felt Rakan's gaze boring into him. It wasn't hatred exactly. It was something closer to respect, though grudging and heavy with frustration. As the doors to the chamber slid shut behind him, Hayden allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Let them stew on it, he thought. It wasn't just about what humans had done. It was about what they might do next. And if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was keeping everyone guessing. The hallway outside the council chamber was quieter than Hayden expected. Normally, these corridors buzzed with the energy of representatives and their aides, discussing matters both mundane and monumental. Today, however, the air was heavy with something different, a tension that hung unspoken between the various species present. Hayden walked at an unhurried pace, his boots clicking softly against the polished floor. Behind him, a small group of aides trailed, their hushed conversations barely audible. He didn't need to listen to know what they were discussing. Humans always became the topic after meetings like this. It wasn't every day you watched an empire brought low by a game that required no weapons, only strategy. Turning a corner, Hayden nearly collided with a tall, wiry figure wearing a dark gray uniform adorned with the insignia of the Jorth Consortium. The Jorathi were traitors first, diplomats second, and soldiers only when absolutely necessary. Their leader, Representative Kaith, had a reputation for being unshakable, always calm and calculating. Kaith tilted his angular head, the metallic sheen of his skin catching the light. "Commander Hayden," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "An impressive performance in the chamber." Hayden stopped and gave a faint smile. "Wasn't meant to be a performance, just stating facts." "Of course." Kaith's pale blue eyes gleamed. "Though I suspect not everyone in that room found your facts reassuring, especially not the Drexens." "They'll adapt or they won't," Hayden said with a shrug. "Either way, it's out of my hands." Kaith's gaze lingered for a moment longer than Hayden liked. "You understand, don't you, that the galaxy is watching now? Humanity has already proven itself resourceful and, shall we say, unpredictable. But this chess incident will leave a mark." "Good," Hayden said simply. "Maybe it'll make some of the more aggressive factions think twice before trying anything." Kaith chuckled softly, a sound like wind chimes caught in a breeze. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it will make them prepare for the day your clever tricks no longer work." Hayden met Kaith's gaze unblinking. "The thing about tricks is, there's always another one. That's the real strength of imagination. It doesn't run out." Kaith's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or wariness. Without another word, the Jorathi representative inclined his head and stepped aside, allowing Hayden to continue on his way. As he walked toward the human delegation's quarters, Hayden couldn't shake the feeling that Kaith's words had been more than idle conversation. The Jorathi were always playing some angle, testing the waters, looking for leverage. If Kaith was probing for information, it meant the stakes were higher than anyone had let on. The human quarters were tucked into the quieter section of the council complex, far from the grand chambers and bustling meeting halls. The design choice wasn't an insult exactly, more of a precaution. The other species liked humanity's contributions, but weren't quite ready to share their neighborhoods. Inside the main room, Hayden found Dr. Marcus Trent hunched over a holographic display, his fingers darting through projections of complex data streams. Trent was a civilian strategist assigned to the delegation, a brilliant but often abrasive man whose brain seemed permanently wired for analysis. "Interesting meeting," Hayden said, dropping into a chair opposite Trent. "Interesting is one word for it," Trent replied without looking up. "You've got the Drexens reeling, the Relosians quietly relieved, and the Jurethi, well, who knows what they're thinking. Probably working on some contingency plan to exploit this whole mess." Hayden nodded. "Kaith cornered me in the hall. He's worried we're going to destabilize the balance of power." "Worried or pretending to be?" Trent asked. "The Jurethi love a good narrative they can manipulate." Hayden considered this. "Doesn't matter. What's the data say?" Trent gestured to the display, which now showed a rotating diagram of Drexen fleet movements overlaid with human psychological warfare tactics. "The Drexens are retreating faster than expected. Publicly, they're calling it a tactical withdrawal, but internal comms suggest their leadership is in chaos. They didn't just lose a war, they lost credibility." "Good," Hayden said. "That'll keep them quiet for a while." "Maybe," Trent said, his tone cautious. "Or it could make them desperate. You back a predator into a corner, it tends to lash out." "Which is why we need to stay a step ahead," Hayden replied. "Any signs of immediate retaliation?" "Not yet," Trent said, "but we've picked up chatter about Drexen operatives trying to gather intel on human colonies. They're looking for weaknesses." "Let them look," Hayden said with a small smirk. "We'll make sure they find exactly what we want them to." Trent's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, that's what makes them nervous, right? The unpredictability. The fact that we don't follow their rules." "Good," Hayden said. "The day they think they understand us is the day we lose our edge." Trent leaned back, studying Hayden. "You ever worry that edge might cut both ways?" Hayden met his gaze. "Every day, but that's why we sharpen it." Before Trent could reply, the room's comm system chimed and a voice announced, "Commander Hayden, you have a secure message from Earth. Priority 1. Hayden rose, nodding to Trent. "Keep running those projections. I'll handle this." In the adjoining communication room, Hayden activated the secure terminal, and a familiar face appeared on the screen. Admiral Blake, the head of humanity's interstellar operations. The older man's expression was as stony as ever, his gray hair cropped short in the military style. "Commander," Blake said. "Status?" "The situation's under control," Hayden replied. "The Drexens are licking their wounds, and the Council's too busy debating to take any real action." Blake's brow furrowed slightly. "And the Jurethi?" "Watching us closely," Hayden said. "Kaith's fishing for weaknesses, but we're not giving him any." "Good," Blake said, "because we've got bigger problems. Intel suggests a coalition of rogue factions might be forming. They're not happy about what happened with the Drexens." "Rogue factions?" Hayden asked, his tone sharpening. Blake nodded. "Think of them as a loose alliance of opportunists. Individually, they're not a threat. Together, well, that's where things get tricky. We need you to keep an eye on the Council and make sure this doesn't escalate." Hayden straightened. "Understood. Anything else?" Blake hesitated for a moment, then said, "Just remember, Commander, humanity's reputation is a double-edged sword. Use it wisely." As the screen went dark, Hayden stood there for a moment, considering the Admiral's words. Humanity had always thrived on walking the fine line between brilliance and chaos. The question now was whether they could keep their balance, or if someone would finally manage to push them off. Hayden stepped out of the communication room, his mind racing. Rogue factions forming a coalition was the last thing humanity needed. It wasn't just about protecting human interests. It was about maintaining a fragile balance that had only recently begun to favor Earth. But if humanity was good at one thing, it was thriving under pressure. Back in the main room, Trent had pulled up a new data stream, showing a map of the galaxy with highlighted sectors. "I just intercepted something interesting," Trent said without looking up. "There's chatter about a meeting between some of the more vocal anti-human factions. Location's still unclear, but it's big enough to set off our alarms." Hayden leaned over the display. "Who's involved?" "The usual suspects," Trent replied. "Some fringe Drexen warlords, a handful of Jurethi separatists, and a few independent mercenary groups. Individually, none of them are a threat, but together, they could cause real damage, Hayden finished. Do we know their objective? Not yet, Trent admitted. But if I had to guess, I'd say they're looking to undermine us before we gain any more influence. They saw what we did to the Drexens, and they don't want to be next. Hayden nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. We need to get ahead of this. If they're planning a meeting, they'll be coordinating through encrypted channels. Can we get access? I've been working on it, Trent said. Give me a few hours and I'll have something. Make it a priority, Hayden said. If they think they can outmaneuver us, they're in for a surprise. As Trent got to work, Hayden called for a meeting with the rest of the human delegation. Within minutes, a small group of officers and strategists had gathered in the room, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and concern. We've got a potential coalition forming against us, Hayden began. Their goal is to stop us before we gain any more ground in the Galactic Union. We don't have all the details yet, but Trent is working on cracking their communications. One of the officers, a tall man named Carter, frowned. If they're coordinating, they'll be careful. It won't be easy to infiltrate their network. Nothing worth doing ever is, Hayden said. But we have an advantage they don't. They're trying to coordinate across species, each with its own priorities and agendas. We've got one team, one goal, and one very important asset. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Our imagination, he continued. They can't predict what we'll do because they don't think like we do. That's how we beat the Drexens, and that's how we'll beat this coalition. The room was silent for a moment, then Carter nodded. What's the plan? Hayden outlined his strategy. It wasn't just about gathering intelligence. It was about turning the coalition's own fears against them. By planting false information and exploiting their mistrust, humanity could fracture the alliance before it even had a chance to solidify. As the delegation dispersed to carry out their assignments, Trent called Hayden over to the holographic display. I've got something, Trent said, his voice laced with excitement. It's not their full network, but I managed to decrypt a few messages. They're planning to meet in the Zareth Nebula. That's deep space, Hayden said, studying the map. Far from any major trade routes or settlements. Perfect for a secret meeting. Exactly, Trent said. But here's the interesting part. They're already arguing over who gets to lead. The Drexen warlords are pushing for dominance, but the Jarethi separatists aren't having it. Hayden smiled. We can use that. If we play this right, we won't need to fight them at all. They'll tear themselves apart. The plan came together quickly. Using the decrypted messages, Trent crafted a series of false communications designed to stoke tensions within the coalition. The Drexens received a message implying that the Jarethi were planning to betray them, while the Jarethi were fed information suggesting that the Drexens were planning a preemptive strike. At the same time, human operatives spread rumors among the mercenary groups, hinting that they were being used as pawns in a larger power struggle. By the time the coalition gathered in the Zareth Nebula, the seeds of distrust had already taken root. Hayden watched from the human command ship as the coalition's fleet assembled, a patchwork of ships from different factions. Through intercepted transmissions, it was clear that tensions were running high. They're already at each other's throats, Trent reported. The Drexens are accusing the Jarethi of sabotage, and the mercenaries are threatening to walk away unless they get paid up front. Good, Hayden said. Let's give them a little push. At his signal, the human ship broadcast a carefully edited message to the coalition fleet. It appeared to come from within their ranks, claiming that the Drexens had secretly contacted the Galactic Union to negotiate their own deal. The reaction was immediate. The Jarethi accused the Drexens of betrayal, the mercenaries demanded answers, and the entire fleet descended into chaos. Within minutes, the coalition had collapsed. Ships broke formation, arguments turned into skirmishes, and the factions scattered, each blaming the others for the failure. Humanity hadn't fired a single shot, but the threat had been neutralized. As the last of the coalition's ships jumped to hyperspace, Hayden leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face. Mission accomplished. Trent looked up from his console. You know, they're going to keep coming. Every time we do something like this, it makes us more of a target. I know, Hayden said, but that's the thing about humanity. No matter how many times they come at us, we'll always find a way to win. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we can imagine possibilities they can't. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Hayden's words hanging in the air. Then Trent nodded. Let's just hope they never figure out how to imagine like we do. Hayden chuckled. If they do, we'll think of something else. We always do.